Welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us again. Going to be speaking with Mr. Scott Megaffin, CEO of Adastra Pharmaceuticals Inc. They're a company focused on the treatment of cancers with high unmet needs. He's joining us on the program to talk about some positive data from their Phase 1B clinical trial concerning high-grade gliomas. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Mr. Scott Megaffin. Thanks for taking the time.
Hi, Neil. It's good to be with you today, and thanks for having me as your guest.
CEO of Adastra Pharmaceuticals, give us a brief look into your professional background and talk briefly about your role there as CEO of Adastra.
Sure, yeah. At Adastra, as you mentioned, we're focused on cancers of a high unmet need, and the lead-in that you provided, high-grade gliomas, is a perfect example of that. As a matter of fact, there may be no greater cancer out there today than high-grade gliomas, glioblastoma, astrocytomas in general. It ranks right up there with pancreatic cancer and mesothelioma as some of the most difficult to treat. But we're committed to it in spite of its difficulty, and we believe we've taken a relatively unique approach. I'm fortunate to have spent my professional career in the pharmaceutical industry. I came up from the business side of our profession, but I work with some very talented clinicians and clinical operations professionals that help us do our clinical trials in not only a thoughtful but a very patient-centric way. And I know a lot of people say that in my industry, but I'm very proud of our team, the work they do every day, and the thoughtfulness they put into it. And from a small company perspective, that's a very meaningful approach because we do work with the clinicians that treat these patients and try to do so in a way that is hopefully a little bit different than what's been done in the past, and yet at the same time bring benefit to them through the innovations we're bringing forward.
Now, as you mentioned, glioblastomas are a very difficult type of cancer to treat. How did Adastra decide to develop a therapy for this particular indication? Have others had any success, limited or otherwise?
They have shown some success in the past, and unfortunately, all those successes have been signaled in the past. They haven't been capitalized on in large clinical trials that have enabled those assets to get into the market and be utilized by physicians for the treatment of high-grade gliomas. I believe, our approach is slightly differently. We, along with what is a trend and an evolving method in the development of oncology drugs, looked at some of the drivers of mutation. And one of the biggest culprits are a couple of short-lived proteins that feed the energy source, the mitochondria of our cell, with a component that helps them multiply. And these two short-lived proteins are called MCL1 and MYC. They're renegade oncogenes that have been identified over time, but you need the right tools, and we believe we have one, that can suppress those oncogenes in the appropriate manner so that potentially other drugs or other therapies can also complement that work and better effectively treat them. And that's what we found in our clinical study. So it really began with what drives these cancer cells, and then how do you get to that root cause in a more thoughtful way? And then most importantly, if there are select populations of patients that tend to be better responders than others, then let's go after them. Because what we know about high-grade gliomas today is they're very heterogeneous in that no two patients are exactly the same. You wouldn't necessarily expect any of us to be exactly the same, no. But these commonalities make the treatment of high-grade gliomas a very big challenge. So what we've tried to do is look at not only the way our drug works, does it deplete these short-lived proteins that I mentioned, MCL1 and MYC, but then which of this kind of vast population of patients with high-grade gliomas seem to be most susceptible, at least initially, to the drivers of these mutations, which are these short-lived proteins. So if we can collect those patients together and treat them with our drug more effectively, and then see that, can we at least offer that segment of patients a potential solution going forward. Whereas in the past, possibly one of the efforts that was put in kind of doing all comers in this very heterogeneous population didn't identify those that could be most receptive to the therapies that were brought forward. And they kind of got lost in a numbers game almost. The statistics just kind of outranked any of the glimmers of hope that may have existed in those trials. So we're looking for this enriched population, and that's what we want to pursue.
Well, first of all, let's talk about the name of this compound. And I understand that you recently released some information about phase 1B trials of this compound. Let's talk a little bit about some of the safety and efficacy results of that trial, if you would.
Sure. Thanks. The compound generic name is zotiraciclib. It is a new molecular entity, so it's one that was developed specifically as a new format. It's not an older drug that's been reformatted and tried to take a fresh approach with. It is a fully unique medication in and of itself. Its mechanism is differentiated from other drugs in a similar class. It's called a CDK inhibitor, and it inhibits predominantly CDK9, which is the driver for replication of the short-lived proteins that I mentioned before. But it also has the attributes where it hits multiple receptors of the CDK isoform. And by doing that, it not only depletes the short-lived protein MYC, but in other CDKs, such as 2, 5, and 7, those have independent functionalities across cell replication and cell division that they interrupt independently of CDK9. And as we've worked with our clinical advisors and most importantly, the researchers that did the work down at the National Cancer Institute that you referenced a minute ago, which has been the focus for the clinical trial that was just completed, they see this multi-kinase approach hitting not only CDK9, but other forms of the CDK receptor sites as an attribute that's very positive. Because what we know about high-grade gliomas and other difficult-to-treat cancers as well is they're intuitively built for survival. And if you put pressure into any one area, then the cells tend to develop escape mechanisms, resistance in a way, so that they figure out other ways to divide, replicate, and survive. This approach that we're taking is not only thoughtful, we believe, but it's one that's intelligently targeted towards the type of cancers that we're using this in. It just happens that one of the reasons we selected high-grade gliomas initially with zotiraciclib is they tend to have a commonality among them, which is a high degree of MYC overexpression, which is that short-lived protein that we're focused on. Other cancers do as well. We just saw this as a nice opportunity to bring forward a medication that is differentiated and unique, working with, a very renowned institution like the National Cancer Institute, and demonstrate its utility in some of the most difficult to treat high-grade gliomas, which are recurrent high-grade gliomas. And that's the data for which our clinical trial was built on. Because there is no cure for patients that don't succumb to their primary disease, then the tumors do come back. And in this recurrent population, which is obviously at least one step more difficult to treat, that's why we're so excited. We saw results in working with the physicians down there that are truly impressive. And although we're saving the magnitude of those results for presentation in an upcoming clinical meeting, we do know that they're highly significant as compared to standard of care, what's used in the community today. And we also feel very encouraged that it's a strong enough signal to pursue next trials, which we're committed to do.
Where can our listeners get some more information about Adastra and about these clinical trials as well?
We're in the process of planning the next trial, so there's really not a lot of information about that. Obviously, we're going to have discussions with the FDA about the results. Those are upcoming as well, so we look forward to those interactions, presenting our trial design to the FDA, at least the thinking, gaining their feedback, and then moving to the next level. Information on the compound is available at adastrarx.com, our website, where you can learn more. But due to the early nature of these clinical trials, Neil, participation in the clinical trial, which we hope to start in the third quarter of this year, will be then available through clintrials.gov. They'll be able to go in and see the locations for which this trial is to be conducted. And we do look forward to going to many centers, more than 20 across the U.S., top on neuro-oncology centers with this trial, so that patients can then go through clintrials.gov, find a center potentially close to them, and seek out care if they qualify or have the right characteristics to qualify for these trials going forward. We're excited about it. As you can appreciate, we're still in the early stages of development, but boy, we look forward to the day where we can bring an improved treatment forward to these patients that need it so desperately.
Well, Scott, I appreciate you joining us here on the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil, and it was good to be with you.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Scott Megaffin, CEO of Adastra Pharmaceuticals. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Listen in, download a SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com, Health Professional Radio.